Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for coming to one of the last talks of the day. So we're going to be talking about today, has the modern data stack failed the business? So before we get into the weeds here, a little bit on me. I'm Paul. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders of Zenlytic. Zenlytic's a large language model powered business intelligence product. I've got a master's in data science from Harvard, based in Denver, Colorado. I've been working on the data stack and these kind of problems for about 8 years now. And I'm very into rock climbing in my free time. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about first what went well, how has the modern data stack positively impacted all of us, sort of why are we all here today using a product like dbt that's an integral part of the modern data stack. What went well? What were some of the big benefits that we got? And then what didn't go well? Where have things kind of gone wrong in the modern data stack? Where even Tristan Andy published a blog post just earlier this year on why the modern data stack is kind of dead. So why did this happen? What went wrong? And then what are those problems? And how do we move forward with a way to fix a lot of those issues? So we'll dive right in. So what went well? I'd put 3 buckets here of what went really well. The first one is efficiency. The next one is scale. And the final one is testing. So first, just getting data in one central spot has gotten a lot easier. Instead of having to write these one-off scripts, these pipelines that are hitting these finicky APIs, we can rely on solid vendors and just off-the-shelf programs to go and get data just really simply and really straightforward, in a straightforward manner. So this has saved a huge amount of engineering hours and made it really just a lot faster to get started and get set up with data. The next one, and I mean the one kind of why all of us are here today, is that dbt made data transformation dramatically easier. And the reason they did that was that before dbt, in those old times, for a transformation to work, you would have to have someone who's knows infrastructure, knows AWS, can manage memory in pipelines, and you're going to get paged when that pipeline goes down. And dbt kind of flipped that model on its head, where now that pipeline is actually running in your data warehouse, in Snowflake, in BigQuery. And that means that to be able to create a pipeline, you don't have to provision new infrastructure. All you have to do is write some SQL. You can run that. And that made transformation dramatically simpler and way more accessible to people without a lot of infrastructure or AWS kind of knowledge. And that's huge. The next one is scale. Now it's possible is insane. You can get started with just absolute best-in-class data warehouses like BigQuery, Snowflake, Redshift may be a stretch, but you can get started immediately with these with just a click. You don't have to have this huge cost outlay and this time of setting up physical servers. The time to get started is so fast, and it's so cheap to get started. You're able to also have a much better developer experience. So just using these products is a lot easier. You have to make way fewer sort of optimizations and way fewer tweaks and things like that to kind of get things to run the way you want them to. And then finally, it's the things that you can do that are useful with data are not limited now by really what you can do technically, but just what is your budget and what actually makes sense for your business. And then the last one in my set of 3 here is testing and QA. So this is probably my personal favorite, but dbt's framework sort of turns testing and QA on by default. And this is really important because if before a framework like dbt you wanted to test data, you wanted to test tables that exist in a warehouse, even for simple things like primary key is unique and not null, you had to actually write a stored procedure and have this thing run on a cron job. It was a really big sort of annoying system. You had to write a lot of the alerting if this failed. You had to do a lot of this by yourself, which meant most of the time it didn't happen. So dbt kind of turned on testing and QA, allowing us to build much higher quality pipelines without having to write all this stuff by ourselves. And that was really huge. So those are the things that I would say went really well. That's the things where we improved a lot. The modern data stack made all of our lives dramatically easier. So then if that's all good, then what happened that wasn't good? When did things kind of go off stray? I would put 3 buckets here that I think things went wrong. The first one is data modeling. So data modeling went wrong primarily due to just sprawl. We'll get into sort of why and how to address this later, but sprawl is kind of the big symptom there. Next one is, I would call it over-specialization. This is where we've got a vendor for kind of everything now. There's a vendor for data quality, observation. There's vendors for everything, and that leads to business people not really knowing where to go. And then finally, I'd call it last mile analytics. So this is where the business actually goes to get data, and this really hasn't changed. And for a lot of business people, we'll see in some quick case studies later, their interface for data hasn't changed, even if they're using a really modern data stack. So to dig into the first one, data modeling has gotten kind of crazy. It's gotten crowded and confusing because it's really easy to make a new table. You can just throw stuff in Snowflake, throw a new DBT model in there, whatever it is. You can make something new really, really quickly and really easily. And this is kind of the converse of what it used to be. So before, there was a really high cost of adding new analytics tables because you might have to change how you the license you bought with your database provider. It was a whole problem. And what that meant was that you had to be really thoughtful about how you created new tables. And that led to really sort of canonical books in our field, like Kimball's book on data modeling, Immon's book on the data warehouse. A lot of practices that made it more consistent and let you, at the end of the day, have a much more repeatable, dry, if you will, don't repeat yourself, data model. But now, with zero cost of adding a new table, you, instead of refactoring something which is actually sort of hard and difficult and no one really wants to do it, you don't refactor it, you just make a new table. And when you do that every time, you have these tables that kind of overlap or don't, or like a second version of this, and only the person who made it actually knows which one is the right one, and this leads to just mass confusion. So if we look in a Fortran style case study here, we've got a mid-market B2B SaaS company. They've got a lot of engineering turnover, which is sort of an endemic problem, and new hires can't find anything. They don't know which of the tables are the right ones. They're not sure where to kind of start, so they're like, okay, I'm just gonna make my own. I'm just gonna add new stuff here. And tables, the number of tables jump like crazy. So all the downstream systems now have double or triple the amount of tables showing up. And the business people have no idea where to go. And that means that the data team is still going to be fielding all these questions kind of ad hoc, as opposed to giving a way for the business team to be able to get any of these answers themselves. And this is not what you want. This is a painful thing. And then the next one is how do we kind of fix this? How do we rein in some of the chaos on the data modeling side? And you see DBT doing a lot of stuff here. This is kind of emblematic of projects getting bigger and more complex. You've got products like DBT Mesh, the semantic layer, a lot of these great products that are trying to deal with this complexity. But there's also a process component as well to stop these things from sprawling. So the first one, and I think by far the most important, is understanding the business. This is what you're gonna see if you read any of the Kimball books or any of the other books on data modeling. Data modeling is fundamentally a lossy representation of what's actually happening in the business. So your job first, before you actually start modeling the data, is to really understand the business, because that's the reality that you're trying to approximate with data. And you've got to understand that really well before you can do a good job modeling it out. And next, it's very straightforward, but you've just got to have PR review, and you've got to have a culture on your team where each new table is actually a liability and not an asset. So you don't want to add a new table if there's something you can do to refactor and make something else more general, because every new table, again, is liability, not an asset. And then finally, and this is one that I highly recommend everybody add to their DBT project, have a macro that just deletes tables in the warehouse once they become unused in DBT. This is a very, very tactical piece of advice, but really important. If you stop running a DBT model, that table is going to still exist in your warehouse, and it becomes not updated and just another source of potential duplication and confusion for someone who's looking in the warehouse trying to find which table they should be using. So delete those old tables, have that set up in a macro that runs automatically. That's essential. And then the next one in our category here is vendor over specialization. So this is sort of you see all the different niches and areas that we have different vendors for, and none of these things talk to each other, and it's really difficult to be able to get any kind of one place where you can go and get answers if you're a person who doesn't spend all day in this stack. So again, another case study here. These are all companies that I'm familiar with, know, and we're just kind of, protecting the names here. So we've got an innovative e-com tech startup. They've got very simple stack, prod database, segment, a few SaaS products, nothing straightforward. This should be pretty easy, pretty good to go. Want to set up a data stack. And the mistake they make first is trying to go and get sort of good products in every category here. And that means that their procurement process takes forever. I mean, it takes 6 months for them to actually get things stood up because they're trying to get a data quality vendor and a data observability vendor and a catalog and all these things just to get started in the first place. And this means that the whole process just takes a long time to get started. Once they're finally up and running, though, the business team doesn't really know where to get answers. Do they go to the notebook product? They go to the BI product? They go to the catalog for that? And since they don't know where to go, again, they're going to be asking the data team these questions. And that doesn't really bode well for you if you're on the data team. You might not have a data team for that much longer. But then the question is, how do you pare that down? How do you make the data stack simpler? And how do you keep things as simple and straightforward as possible? So we've all seen this kind of explosion in the number of vendors that exist in this space, which is truly crazy. And the solution is first to just keep it simple. You don't need a luxury data stack. You don't need a tool for everything. And just being able to keep things simple is the move here. The next one is ChatGPT has made it possible to build a lot of the basic stuff just in-house. If you've got something that you want to test, it's a distribution of some kind, ask ChatGPT to write some code for you. It will do a surprisingly good job, and you might be surprised what kind of tools you can replace just with a little Python script. The other one is use more capabilities of your existing vendors. There are a few kind of big parts in the data stack, and one thing that I think DBT is doing really well and has unveiled a lot here is that they're trying to offer more products around observability and around some of these other systems that are kind of separate tools right now. So take advantage of that. Try to use more of the existing capabilities. This is not only good for your budget, but this is also good for your end users. Your end users don't want a ton of different places to go to get answers. They want a few places to go and really clear places when they have questions. And the last one is definitely nearest and dearest to my heart. This is what I would call last mile analytics. So to describe this, this is where the rubber meets the road for business users actually getting access to data. So this is the final step when data is sort of leaves all the infrastructure that we've spent time building and goes to actually have impact on the business itself. And again, our case study here, we've got a mid-market consumer tech company. They've got Fivetran, DBT, Snowflake, big data revolution is coming in. And but the problem is they go in and they have this new and really powerful infrastructure, but the Tableau dashboards are the same. They haven't changed. And then the business people have to push back and say, why are we spending all this money if our end experience is actually still the same? And that's tough. Like it's tough to justify if you go to the business team and say, hey, well, all these things have improved, and they say, how? My experience is actually the same as it was before. And that's something that we've got to take really seriously as data people, because BI hasn't really changed in 10 years. It's about the same now as it was in 2014. And we're actually going to do a little exercise here. Which one of these two is 2024? Is this one or this one? This one or this one? Any guesses? That's right. This one is 2024. But they are pretty close. And the question then is, why are they close? Why are they close when that has happened? When we've got all these new vendors in the data space, all this new technology out here, why does BI look mostly the same as it did 10 years ago? And the reason that I would say is that most of this value, all the things that have come from this, have actually accrued to the data team, not to the business team. So the business team still has approximately the same interface, but the data team has an amazing wealth of new tools. So the problem is that it hasn't actually gotten easier for the business teams. That for us, our life is way better. Products like Snowflake, DBT, all make our life like way better as data people. But the core thing is that hasn't actually cascaded down to the business teams. Then the average wait for a dashboard is 4.5 days. That's twice as long as getting a physical thing from the UK to the US. That's pretty crazy. And when you look at actual business people and you ask them what they think, 2/3 of them feel like they can't really use their BI platform, and that hasn't really changed in the last 10 years. And the thing is this is not fault necessarily of the data team. We've kind of done everything that we can. We've had onboarding sessions, data stewards, office hours, like docs, tutorials, guides, all these things, largely unread, but all these things have just not been that successful in having business users actually ask and answer these questions themselves. So the thing is that to make this work, I think we've got to make it work how business teams already work, which is conversation. That's like back and forth. That's being able to ask a question, refine it, iterate on it, and really get answers to the things that they care about without having to learn a new SaaS product. That's something that looks a lot different from all the BI products that we looked at before. So we'll go through a little demo to show what I think that looks like. So here, we've still got dashboards because dashboards are important. They matter. They're a good way to look at data. But you've got to be able to drill past those dashboards to ask questions beyond what's just there and what the data person thought about to put on the dashboard or to put as a drop down, something you can change. So here we're gonna ask this question, showing these totals by channel instead of weekly, filtering it out for just the repeat users, and we'll go Zoe, our AI agent here, will work and put this together, and give us our actual result here. So this is great. This has answered the question. I didn't have to figure out some SaaS interface. I just sort of asked a question and got an answer. And that's great. The only problem, though, is that this is a really specific question. I asked this in a way that, is kind of that way because, I probably know SQL. I kind of know what's going on. I'm asking things in a really straightforward way. So this example we're going to look at, though, is one where it's not straightforward. This is one where, it's going to be rambly. Where I'm actually saying something like, hey, I'm working at this company. I just started recently. I'm working in marketing. I don't really know what we have, but I need to better understand the channels and campaigns. Can you just kind of help me with that? And these kind of generic questions, these are the questions that the business people actually have. And this is one of the big disconnects between the questions the business has and the questions they need answered and the questions that we try to answer as data people. We answer these questions very much as, you have a SQL query, let's go get you the answer to that SQL query. Whereas the real questions are more actionable. They're more like, I need to understand how I can improve campaign performance. It's not about a specific metric, and the business people need to be funneled into, what do we have, what makes sense, what can you look at to help actually solve the problem that you have, as opposed to just pull the data that you need. And this part is really important. And then now, instead of just having like a data pull done for me, I can also ask, hey, can you help me interpret this? I don't always know which things to weight here and what kind of matters the most. But here I'm able to get a really actionable result that Facebook has the highest ROAS and best cost of acquisition here. So then I can keep going. I can say, okay, so which campaigns inside of Facebook are doing well? Where should I double down? Where should I be allocating more budget? And Zoe's going to come back and give us the next step here. So I can say, okay, these are how my campaigns are performing. And I can see here I've got this top sellers campaign that actually has better efficiency metrics, but I'm not allocating as much spend to right now. So I can then take that action and allocate from my organically you campaign to that top sellers campaign I had there. And that's just an example of how to go from from these high level questions that aren't about specific data, but are about an outcome that matters to the business person, and funnel them to data that can actually help them get the outcome that they want and better understand how to make good decisions there. So finally, has the modern data stack failed? I'd say the answer is actually twofold. It's been amazing for data people. All of our tooling has gotten much better, and our day-to-day workflow is now pretty great, actually. But the value hasn't actually made it to the business yet. And I think we've got to think a lot about how we can stop the sprawl in data modeling, how we can reduce just the sheer number of vendors that we have, consolidate things and keep them simple for the business. And finally, how we can make data actually accessible to the business. When they go to access data, can we make that interface something that they can really use? So thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
So one of the things I'm thinking is that the benefit of the modern stack is that we can deliver data fast to the business. Do you think this is like a positive outcome of the modern stack?
Absolutely. So that's absolutely a positive outcome, and I think that's one of the reasons that it's sort of justified the investment so far. But at the end of the day, it's we can do some more stuff, but I don't think that change has been so dramatic that business people are saying, "Oh, this is a great investment. How can we do more of this?"
And the follow-up, I also comparing to what business is asking questions from 10 years ago to today, and it's actually the same questions. So that's why they have the same answers. But is there anything that you think we can drive business to say, hey, you know what? Here's a better way to look at the data and make some conclusions.
Yeah, that's a great point. The point is that the business people are asking the same questions today as they were 10 years ago, and I would say that's actually more of a failing of the tools, like we saw there, because business people aren't, their job isn't to think about like which data is maybe most relevant for their problem, their question they're trying to have, because the high level decisions they're trying to make are things like, should I move this distribution center from this location to this other location? And if they're the ones that have to try to boil that down into what data should I be looking at to make that decision, they might not be looking at the right things. Whereas if they can ask that high level question and be guided to the right areas and the right stuff that they should be looking at, then those questions are going to change a lot more. So I think that's more about the business people having to try to do this scoping down and just guess at what data is relevant for them, instead of having a system that can actually shepherd them to the right stuff.
Yeah, I got it. So kind of building on that, at what point do you think that enhancing self-serve to the point where people are capable of answering questions the way that you demonstrated today outweighs, I guess, the alternative of us as the analytics thought leaders being just that and taking advantage of all those additional benefits and tooling that we have to be able to identify what those opportunities may be and then be prescriptive, I guess, in terms of what we bring to the business versus relying on the questions to answer to solve the problems.
I think a lot of that is it's not either or. It's like the really high value things, like the data team should be prescriptive and should be thinking proactively about like, hey, what can we do? What projects would be really helpful for the business team? But right now the problem is that those questions are rarely actually answered because you're just covered in a flood of these kind of low value like ad hoc questions. So it's difficult to get there. And the other thing is there's a lot of questions that business people have that they just don't ask because they don't want to bother the data team. And we see this a lot, at Zenlytic. We see what people are asking, and they ask a lot of questions to the AI system that they just won't ask to humans because they don't want to bother you, or the question is kind of hard. It's like, hey, why did this thing happen? I know the data people don't like that because that's hard. So, they'll ask the AI system that, but they won't really ask the human. So I think you unlock a lot of questions that people really have that they might not be asking now.
Yeah, fair. Also, your point of clearing up space to do those things is very, very real.
I guess just to play devil's advocate, like with the old style dashboards, the more static ones, even though they're just as ugly as they were 10 years ago, with the benefit of when you send that link to somebody, they're seeing exactly what everyone else is seeing. I'm just wondering, in this world where self-service is becoming more accessible, and especially with
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not saying at all that dashboards aren't useful. That's actually a lot how a lot of the stuff that is found is persisted. And that's a good thing. If you're going to look at something on a recurring basis, a dashboard is just a lot easier than asking the question again. So, I think it's really important to have sort of two paths. One path is like the I'm going to look at this on a recurring basis, and that really should be a dashboard. And the other path is like I have a question that I really just need the answer to once. And that should be something that is not saved because it just clogs up the interface and it's difficult for everybody to find what they need after that. Yeah. I think there's also sort of a bit of a natural cycle here where things get crazy and you get a lot of the kind of creative destruction that maybe is a little bit over the top and then it has to kind of cool down and consolidate and we're sort of at that point now where a lot of things people can't just spend money on everything now. They've got to pick where solutions are actually helpful for them and find the things that actually work. So, but we'll probably have another cycle like this in another few years. So no, you're absolutely right. And I think the distinction that I would make is that there's only a few genres of products that you need. So I would say you probably don't need a data quality product and an observability product, but you definitely need a data warehouse. So, if you have like Firebolt is maybe another vendor in there that's also a data warehouse, you're going to either get Firebolt or you're going to get Snowflake. You're not going to get both. Well, you shouldn't get both. And I think that's the distinction. So, Zenlytic is a BI product, and you're either going to buy us, or you're going to buy Looker, or you're going to buy Tableau. And I think that's more the way I think about it. That you should have a small number of products, but a lot of options to choose from in those products. So the problem isn't necessarily that there's a lot of competition. It's that there is a lot of vendors going after really, really small niches, which means these things never talk to each other.
You talked about there's like a lot of tools that have been developed for like data teams over the years, and there's like pretty much nothing non-existent for like business. Like, do you have any initial thoughts on like what would be the first steps in that direction?
Well, I think a lot of it is like the kind of stuff that I was talking about, where it's the data team needs to do a better job, like on the data modeling side, keeping things as simple as possible, as straightforward as possible, because data is not the full time job of the vast majority of the actual business, and it's our job to kind of make it as easy as possible, as accessible as possible for them, so that they can actually use it. So a lot of what I've been talking about here is just keeping things as simple as possible, making the interfaces easy for business people to use, making the locations of where things are easy to find. And a lot of that stuff isn't rocket science. It's just discipline.
So you can do that like on a consistent basis. You might not even need to do that.
Depends on the problem, but I mean a lot of the things that are sort of products now might actually be Python scripts. So great. I think we're probably at time, but thank you everyone for coming.